gentlemen, our second panel discussion for today is titled Reboot and Redesign, the SMEs, Entrepreneurship and Corporate Thinking. And we're delighted that we're joined by some experts in their fields, some thought leaders who will share with us their perspectives on this topic. But before I invite our panelists to join us up on stage, I'd like to see that the hall is at least a little bit more full before we commence with this segment. If any of you have friends outside and you'd like to quickly send them a message, we're about to begin, and I'd like to see the hall a little bit more full before we start off officially. Well, I believe we have been given the signal to go ahead, so we will get started, ladies and gentlemen. As I mentioned, our panel discussion now is about Reboot and Redesign, the SMEs, Entrepreneurship and Corporate Thinking. I'd now like to invite our panelists as well as our session chair and moderator to please take their seats on stage. Our session chair and the moderator is Dr. Ravi Bamanusinghe. He's the founder of Sri Lanka SME. He's also visiting faculty of PIM at the University of Sri Jayawardenepura. So we invite our moderator and session chair to please join us. I'd also like to introduce to you our panelists. We have one of our panelists who is connecting virtually from Australia, and he is Dr. Winston Liana-Arachi, Director of Nutrinovate Australia. He's online, and we welcome him in our midst. We'd like to welcome our next panelist to take stage, Mr. Mithila Vegapitiya, Director Chief Marketing Officer at Potenza ANZ Australia. He's also Executive Director People and Brand at Laughs Holdings Private Limited. Our next panelist is Professor Niharika Vohra, Professor of Organizational Behavior at IIM Ahmedabad. And our final panelist is Ms. Mahesha Amarasuriya, who is Director at MasterCard Sri Lanka. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we now see that our panelists have taken stage. We have one more panelist who will be joining us on screen right now. And with that, I'll now hand over control to our session chair. Before I tell him to officially ask his first question, let me also once again remind you, ladies and gentlemen, about the QR code on your tables. If you would like to ask a question to our panel, feel free to contact the WhatsApp number that you can get by scanning the QR code, and our moderator will be happy to take your questions. On that note, it's now over to Dr. Ravi Bamanusinghe.
Okay, good afternoon. Right. So, I might say rebuild, reboot, radical self-inquiry. I think that is what our technical chair said in his concluding speech. I think he gave us a very strong message to us to make sure each companies need to have a self-inquiry. With that in mind, if I may take you to today's session, that would be talking about restart and redesigning the SME, entrepreneurship and corporate thinking. So in that light, actually, we need to look at a couple of things. First of all, we need to see what is restarting and what is redesigning. So the way what we discussed was, we like to establish restart means maybe something that has been installed and we need to have a kind of a strategy to get it to the next level. So in that light, we like to focus on that discussion on the strategic thinking that this eminent panel is going to be imparting to us. So that aspect, I think we are going to look at it in that sense. And then secondly, we are looking at a redesigning. Redesigning is, you can see it as an improvement and also maybe incremental. So therefore, the second part is going to be more tactical. So therefore, this discussion is going to be divided into two parts. There's a first round, we will be, this eminent panel is going to be talk about quite a bit on the strategic side, and once that is done, and then it will be going to the tactical part of in that sense. Before we go further, to create the trend here, I like to draw your attention to some aspects. Now, when we talk about entrepreneurship, this reminds us the Harvard explanation for entrepreneurship. Harvard explanation is very fascinating. It talks about pursuit of opportunities beyond resources you currently control. One, if I may repeat again, pursuit of opportunities beyond pursuit of opportunities beyond the challenges you currently control. So therefore, in that light, it has quite a depth here. Because entrepreneurship is all about you need to manage beyond your resources that you have. So that aspect needs strategy as well as tactics. So therefore, we need to look at that part very strongly for us. Then in the morning, we listen to quite a knowledgeable points from the keynote speaker, Professor Wohar. So therefore, that message talked about very psychological safety. I think bringing those two together, I think we have a fantastic opportunity to have a discussion today in that light. So before I go further, I like to draw your attention that now when you think about when I was listening to actually Professor's speech, that reminded me to a book by the name of No Rules Rules by Reed Hastings. Reed Hastings was a founder of Netflix. And together with Professor Elaine Myers, they have written a fantastic book by the name No Rules Rules. That book articulates that company doesn't have rules, very fascinatingly. So it is about people are free to talk whatever want to constructively, not in a bad way. And then if you look at the story behind Reed Hastings, in 2003, Reed Hastings had a tough time because he was doing a sub kind of activity with Blockbuster. Then he had a debt of $67 million US and also 50 million operating cost. Right? So therefore what happened was he approached the founder of Blockbuster and asked the founder, can you buy my company? Then founder Antonio said, no, I'm not interested. So he went back and he looked at what the strategy that he could adopt for his business to make it a success. Then he came out with over time, he came with a streaming option. That is the strategy that he adopted. That was in 2003, 2005. By 2009, what has happened? Blockbuster went busted. So that is the kind of a strategy that I think we need to look into. So taking that into consideration, may I call upon Mithila, why don't you talk about your experience and what are your thoughts in that light, how to look at our businesses? Because the idea here is that this audience would like to take back home, not just what to do, because we are tired of us listening to what to do comments. We want to know how to do. So please come out and tell us how to do things, how to strategically make things happen. So strategy execution is far more important in that context. If we can take something back to our audience, I think they will be much happier. Over to you, Mithila.
Thank you, Ravi. So first of all, special thanks goes out to Dr. Ravi and Dr. Samantha for giving me this opportunity to come. It's a tough ask because it's right after lunch. It's the sleepy session. So we'll try to make sure this conversation is very exciting for all of you. So first of all, the theme is very interesting, right? Reboot, redesign, rethink. Peter Drucker once said, in times of turbulence, the greatest danger is not the turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic. And in today's day and age, with whatever's going on in the world and in Sri Lanka, it's an extremely turbulent time. So the biggest danger for all of us is to act with yesterday's logic. To tell you a bit about my exposure, I started my first startup when I was 24 years old. We ran it, I'm still running it for the 7th year running. We managed to hit $1 million worth of revenue in the second year. We started with 2 people. Today, we are 120 consultants all around the world. We are one of the fastest growing technology consulting, management consulting startups. We are headquartered in Singapore, in Australia. We touch 9 different countries. Now, the things that I have learned by working in a very global context is immense, and it really fits today's topic of SME, entrepreneurship, and corporate. So that is one thing that I do. So I work with a lot of young people. So the average age of all employees, or as I call potenza family members, is 24. So they're extremely young. Most are Gen Zs. So when you look at how you adapt the way we do things in a startup and how you bring it to a corporate, it's very important, because with these turbulent times, and not only to mention the macroeconomic context, we have a massive amount of brain drain happening, not only in startups but in corporates as well. It's very hard to find good talent today. So from a strategic point of view, how do we really use different strategies to overcome these barriers is what I want to do. So the second part of the conversation is I was recently appointed as an executive director overlooking people and brand for the Laughs Group. So 20 different industries, 20 different legal entities worth of people and brand. So it's two different, completely different worlds, startup and corporate. So at Laughs, my main strategy is to make Laughs Sri Lanka's biggest startup. So with that comes a lot of resistance, a lot of change, and a lot of barriers, right? But I think from a strategic point of view, so Ravi very specifically said, how do we do it, right? So I think that we need to discuss in the tactical component of the conversation. I'd like to structure it in such, so every organization, all of the organizations that all of you all represent, you all would have two very specific areas that you want to apply the strategy. Number one, from revenue generation point of view, right? How would I redesign or rethink my organization today to increase sales and marketing as well as customer reach? How do you increase your top line? Then you have the second part, where the cross-management functions come into play. Your finance, your HR, your supply chain, your IT, your corporate communications. How do you bring these support services up to ensure that your revenue is generated in an optimal manner, as well as how do you optimize your bottom line? So the different strategies you can use in today's context is completely different. The strategies that I am sort of used to. But some of these ideas in today's corporate, specifically in Sri Lanka, might be viewed as a bit radical. So I was having an interesting conversation with Dr. Samantha also, where the conversation was posted saying, we want to do change, but we might not be able to change overnight. So it's about structuring that change across a period of time. And again, it's all about people. For me, personally, it's all about people. So how do we really empower people in our organizations, remove the barriers, really empower them to take your organizations to the next level? There's a lot of examples that I can bring forth. In a lot of our organizations today, it's run in a very autocratic or bureaucratic manner, right? Where you have sir, boss culture, where we want to bring in first name culture, right? Where everyone's equal. You want to make sure your organization structures are tall in terms of designations. The fact being that you want to add in an element of progression to your people. For example, if you have a designation of an assistant manager, you can break it down to AM level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with different pay scales. Then an employee or a staff member would feel the level of progression saying, hey, you know what, I'm getting promoted every 6 months, right? I am being measured in terms of my performance as well as I'm being remunerated properly. However, even though your organization structure remains tall, the culture of your organization should be very flat. I should be able to walk up to an intern and have a very equal conversation on equal grounds. Now, this conversation does not happen in most corporates. So that is one element that I see that needs to change in today's day and age. So from a strategy point of view, we really need to look at, so I'll be talking a bit more in the next session in terms of finance. Interest rates are at an all-time high, right? So how do you manage your capital investments in the next 2 years to come? How do you manage your taxes, right? How do you look at centralization, right? Supply chain. Now, if you take an example, most of these large organizations, the large conglomerates would have, massive supply chain costs amounting up to around 100 billion. How can you save at least 1% of that? How do you centralize? How do you look at IT? How do you look at automation? How do you look at data and analytics? How do you look at HR? Right? You have all of these badges of great place to work, but how do you actually make it a great place to work? So let's discuss in detail, Doctor, probably in the next session.
Okay, actually, you mentioned a couple of things. One point that took my attention is you have taken human resource as a strategic advantage, right? So now I just ask one question before I come to the Professor Vohara. How do we call about transformational leadership? How do you inculcate, quick one, huh? How do you inculcate that kind of quality among your people who are very young, but then they need, young is good, but then we need to inculcate that because that will be the future of management. Any quick answer?
Yes. So it's all about freedom, I believe. So the Generation Z, Gen Z, they are knowledge workers. They demand respect through knowledge. They want freedom to perform. They want to be measured, but not too monitored, right? So it's very important we understand this. And today we have the concepts of digital nomads, right? People who want to work from anywhere in the world, right? Working from home. In Australia, we talk about a 4-day work week, right? How can we use all of these concepts for our advantage? Now, someone might say, you know what, in Sri Lanka, this doesn't work. I agree and I disagree. I feel we need to come up with a monitoring and measuring mechanism to ensure we give that freedom, but we really reward the people who abide by it, but take a conversation with someone who does not do it. One more thing, we need to do some, many more things, a bit more innovative. Now, for example, we're in the Laughs group, as you know, they have ventured into the leisure sector. So we are trying to implement something called work from resort.
Okay, fine.
Right, so during the week, you go to one of the resorts, you work from there. And you get a subsidized rate to work from there. So these are some of the key elements that
would be fine, Mithila. Now, I want to come to Professor Vohara. Now, I like your comment. Psychological safety is a muscle and not a bone. Now, I would like to draw attention. Now, when it comes to entrepreneurship and SMEs, they are very strong in entrepreneurship, but they are very relatively weak in management skills. Now, most of my experience in Sri Lankan entrepreneurship, they are poor human resource managers, right? Now, then those are the companies also. Now, if you talk about psychological safety, the trust and the openness is yet to happen in most of the organizations. But I think if that happens, as Mithila said, I think we can have a very dynamic, kind of very fantastic, flexible organization. Now, my question to you is, Professor, now how to build the muscle of entrepreneurs for psychological safety?
Thank you for your question. I think I will go a little beyond just psychological safety. I think having worked with early stage startups, SMEs, large businesses, I can definitely say that when you start a business, that's a different stage where possibly as an entrepreneur you do everything from unpacking the boxes to having the most important meetings with the bankers and so on and so forth. And that's a very fascinating stage for a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of startup people. But at some point, the business has to move away from you as the hero and you as the central person in the business, because while that was a strength when you started, that becomes a bottleneck as you grow. And once you, so then the time comes for setting up all kinds of practices. So whether it is having an HR department, whether it is having somebody do your accounts well, making sure your compliances are met, making sure you have something put in place for supply chain. So all aspects of the business need to be then headed by professionals. and not by you and not by your whims and fancies, because no entrepreneur can know everything. It doesn't matter how great your idea was, how wonderfully you started, and how much sweat and blood you've put in, but for that business to grow, you will need to actually start to identify professionals or people whose strength that is to do it, and then transfer power to them, transfer accountability to them, because at the end of the day, you have to get them to do most of the work. So I think that is number one, that you need to do that. Because my experience is that many times businesses don't grow because the entrepreneur is not willing to let go of the business, or let go of important decisions, or let go of important information, and that becomes the bottleneck. The second thing that I want to say is that, there is a difference between how managers think and how entrepreneurs think. So for managers, control is extremely important, because that is how you get to do the work. But for entrepreneurs, I think intuitively they understand that I can only grow if I leverage on the people I know. So leveraging becomes important. Co-creation becomes important. Having the skill to suffice with what is often termed as the bird in hand. So a bird in hand is better than two in the bush, they say. As an entrepreneur, you have the capability to not focus on the two in the bush, but with the bird in hand. And I think the last one is to move away from predicting and figuring out how we will do this, but to have a sense of control by creating the opportunities that come to you. Of course, this is all coming from the work that is termed as effectuation, which is a certain order of thinking, which is different from managerial control-oriented thinking. The last thing I want to possibly say is that, at least in India, my experience is that a lot of SMEs fail to grow, and maybe that is true for Sri Lanka, so you can correct that, is one, because they don't manage their working capital well. There isn't access to working capital, or they don't simply pay attention to it. And the second is, the government sometimes gives certain protections to SMEs. So for example, they might say that certain amount of, let's say I am a paint business, certain amount of paint has to be bought by the government organizations that is manufactured in small businesses. So there's almost assured business. And that is really the death of it, because when there's assured business, you produce poorly, you don't actually make sure that you are competing in the market for quality. And the second thing is, in India, a lot of businesses, what they do is they, by design, remain at that level, so that they continue to have that 20% of the business of the government, which they can actually do at much poorer quality. And if you, by design, remain small, and you don't focus on quality and innovation and modernization, I mean, you're committing to death. So I think you have to continue to innovate, you have to continue to look at quality, and you have to decide to grow. So those would be the three things.
Actually, what you said is very nice, because you reminded me of Grainer, who talks about growth of a business: existence, survival, takeoff, control, takeoff, partnership. Then existence is about about to stand, and survival is about just to walk, and then control and takeoff is just about to run. And in that context, what you just said, where would be able to introduce or adopt the psychological ideas of psychological safety? If you can give a quick answer, would be much appreciated.
Sure. I think, there's often a saying which says, business is like a baby which never grows up. And if you continue to do that, if you continue to treat it like a baby which never grows up, then it'll be always yours. And you will never be able to listen to bad news that's coming to you. So I think at the owner, the entrepreneur, has to also make a choice of what size do I want my business to be. And if you really want to grow, then you have to have the capacity to listen to others with no filters and no judgment, which is psychological safety, right? Which you can't say, please come and say things that please me. Or don't come and say things that confirm what I want you to say to me. So I think as long as we are able to recognize that, yes, I want to grow, and if I want to grow, then definitely psychological safety becomes important. So if you want to take off and if you want to grow, I think there is no way that you will not listen to people around you. It's not about saying that, we are equals. I don't think, I like Confucius, who says inequality is important for stability. Yeah, that's true. There is inequality and there's always going to be inequality. We may disagree with it, but that's important for us to recognize that. But inequality doesn't mean that my voice is the only voice that gets heard if I'm the more powerful one in that sense. So.
Wonderful, Professor. Actually, you have really clarified something actionable to our audience here and even personally for me, right? Now, I would like to go to Australia. Right, Winston over there is smiling at me now. Winston is a Neutron Innovate director. So, Winston, now in the light of this, the tempo, what can you say from your Australian experiences?
Okay, thank you CPM and thank you Dr. Ravi, Samantha and others for giving us this opportunity to join this forum from Australia. So I would like to bring some insights into this forum or the discussion from our experience in the Australian industry as well as from our operations in Sri Lankan market. In saying that, I would like to adopt a different approach and address the small and medium scale industry and the difficulties that are faced by them in Sri Lanka and how we are handling those difficulties and how we should actually take them in a practical manner. So in saying that, it is true that there are some hardships for business in Sri Lanka due to difficulties for manufacturers, especially in sourcing raw materials, packaging materials and others, then logistic issues, both domestic and international, and then fluctuations in the local market. So, but on the other hand, the similar issues are there in most other countries, including Australia. So, more or less, Sri Lanka, you are not alone in this predicament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you continuing or shall I come round again or you want to continue?
You have any questions?
Yeah,
Dr.
now
Ravi?
I may like to know, now there may be challenges over there. Now again, if I may go back to pursuit of opportunity beyond resources you control, right?
Yeah.
So you are a person like that. So what could you say for Sri Lankan audience that a critical point that in strategic terms, what you could say from your Australian experience? One critical point.
Yeah, okay. The main critical point that I see that in redesigning or restarting your business is to reposition your product. In the manufacturer's perspective, you should reposition your product in a correct market, especially for small and medium scale manufacturers, rather than cutting down on your margins and trying to compete with mass scale producers. So the main thing is to identify your score and reposition your products in the correct way. In doing that, you can either target the local market, which would be either a niche market, such as in food industry, for instance. That is where I'm more engaged in. There are emerging markets like healthy food products, then there is organic foods, probiotic foods, then when it comes to that there is vegan food. So all these trends are coming up and they are increasing in this existing product and in this decade. Okay? So, yeah.
Thank you, Winston. Actually, what you are trying to say is that identify maybe innovative blue spaces in the market and maybe tap it rather than head-on competing with the main player, because then you may have to get into price war. So to avoid that and create a space for yourself in the market or something like that. Thank you, Winston, for giving us that particular insight. Now I am coming to Mahesha, last but not the least, and also quite a wealth of experience, which is very important area that she is going to talk about. So may I invite Mahesha to comment about your thoughts.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this forum. So I'm going to actually touch a little bit on the SME side, which is one of our strategic initiatives and strategic importance for MasterCard as well at a local and at a global level. So as you may be aware, SMEs and MSMEs play a very strategic role in the overall economy of the country, contributing to over 50% of the GDP and comprising of about 80% of all businesses, and even employment-wise coming close to about 50% of the employment. So what we saw over the last couple of years is that from COVID to the economic downturn, there was ripple effect on of course on all businesses, but however the impact for MSMEs, SMEs is even more. So this impact that was there over the last couple of years, if you look at, in summary, as the key components or key areas or the key impact areas, one of course is inflation, which has a dual impact, one being on the high cost of production and then also on the demand side, that means a reduced demand, especially when the supply is non-essential service or a product. And secondly, I think it was already touched also on working capital management, which is also coming on together with liquidity, access to credit, all that coming as one component in terms of finance and liquidity management. And the present import restrictions again poses a risk or as a roadblock or a threat to some of the SMEs presently. And finally, but which was also mentioned by Mithila, retaining skilled staff. SMEs are prone to losing staff. Everybody is prone to losing staff as part of migration, but MSMEs or SMEs would also lose them for other larger companies and then also as part of migration. So if we very quickly look at a few of the strategic areas which a SME could focus on, how they could improve, what they could do. So what I see is what happened over the last couple of years was actually a test of survival. So those who were able to adapt and change their business models were those who were able to survive. So my point number one is agility and adaptability. How quickly can a business change? How quickly can a business adapt to what is happening in the environment? Let's take a very simple example. When everything went into lockdown and basically a shutdown across the country, who was the first, or what were the first companies that were able to shift from a physical shop to online? Who were able to immediately start accepting online orders, have that delivery process in place? So that showed the sign of adaptability. What happened in the environment? How quickly can you change? And secondly, now when there's a restriction in importing, so if the production involves imported raw materials, how fast can the business look at substitutes, for that imported raw material within the local system and still be able to deliver. So that's the sort of strategic decision one SME need to look at in order to survive in this present context. And secondly, look at the business processes. It is always says stick to the knitting. Look at, consolidate your processes, look at the core businesses. So what are the key components of the business? What do you need to retain? What do you essentially must retain? At what are the good to have things? So one thing I need to emphasize here, I think, which was previously mentioned also, sometimes there are misunderstandings or myths or misdirection where training staff or staff benefits are considered as non-essential, which is a huge mistake that one could make, because staff is key and staff only will deliver finally. So irrespective of the economic business environment, retaining and maintaining all the staff, training and retaining staff becomes an essential part. So on the technology and digital side, I am hoping to touch on the next part on the more tactical side. So I think that's about it.
Interestingly, I want to ask a very naive question. My experience with SMEs, SMEs are reluctant to get into card transactions because they believe that it is traceable. Now, you know, we have to accept the fact that we are very concerned about Inland Revenue Department, IRD, right? So therefore, there's a bit of a concern that they are willing to look at it in a way, so they are much more happier with the cash transactions rather than moving into credit transactions. So if it is the reality, now, my belief is actually they can get now if you are running a restaurant, if you are having a credit card transaction, more people will come to patronize the restaurant. But it is not happening. It's not easy to convince them. I like to hear from my personal knowledge, because that's a very important part. I think we need to break that strategic kind of gray area. What would you like to comment about that, Maisha?
Yeah, okay. So I mean, I think it's common. We've all come across situations where there are places that do not accept credit cards, or there are also places that discourage accepting credit cards for whatever reason. So one reason is that the owner of the place, the entrepreneur or the SME owner, feels that there is a merchant discount rate which the bank that is providing the POS terminal would be charging. So it could be 3%, 3.5%, 2.5%. It could be something in that range, not that it's ever like a 10% or so. So they feel that this is a cost. But in reality, this is actually not a cost when you look at the cost of cash. Because global studies have shown that cost of cash is as high as over 9%. Because accepting cash, there is a risk involved. There is a risk, then you need to insure if you are like accepting large volumes of cash and then some cashier is handling it. At the end of the day, someone will have to go and deposit, or you have to keep it in a vault and you need to provide security for it. There has to be frequent reconciliation happening. So that is from the point of view of, I mean, just looking at the comparison between cash and card. So there is a cost associated with it. Secondly, in terms of business volumes, if you are accepting credit cards, there is definitely going to be an increased volume of business, because the customers who come there, if it is only cash, they won't be able to spend a lot. Now what happens is most of these businesses, most of the spending happens on enticement, and it's not really based on the need. You know, you see things you want to buy. So then if you don't have cash, you can't buy, but if you have a credit card, yes, you can. And the other part of it is another myth or or rather a communication or information gap, is that the cost of the terminal, what is being used to swipe the card or dip the card, there is a feeling that that is very expensive. So while the large brick-like terminals, which you've seen in large shops, does have a cost associated to it, but that will be surpassed by the increased volumes that will come by using or accepting credit cards. And secondly, especially targeting SMEs, a lot of banks have gone into like smaller POSs, and there are soft POS. That means you don't need to pay for a terminal. Your mobile itself, with the relevant software installed, will be able to, on a tap and pay basis, accept transactions. So these are things, and I think what is really important is, I actually see some bankers also in the audience. So when or finance companies, bankers, where SMEs and MSMEs come to them, they look up to the bankers or the finance company, the branch manager, to get advice. So this kind of awareness creation is needed from all of our end to bring up the digital economy. Our digital economy is very small, it's not even 5%. So we need to together work towards pushing it up.
Just a question, what would be your magic word for getting them into, convert them into cards? Any magic words?
I think it would be efficiency, cost, and process management.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Right. So, I think I have not received any questions yet. I think they may be waiting till the 2 rounds are gone. It doesn't matter. So now, again, I will come to the next round of questioning. Before that, I wanted to invite once again Mithila, 30 seconds comment about in the light of this on strategic point of view, please. Your comment. Just summing up your thoughts. 30 seconds.
Sure. So in terms of summing up the strategy, I think we really need to repackage organizations, from the organization structure, board structure, how we are really equipped to face the next 5 years. Because it doesn't matter how you face the last 25 years, the next 5 years is going to be completely different. So you really need to restructure your organization from a structural point of view, as well as the way you think from a cultural point of view.
Wonderful. Professor?
So I guess from what I'm hearing from the panel, I think one of the things that's very clear is that maybe a lot of decision making is happening in a very traditional way. So, my father used to say this, I believe this, but there is really no real education about some of these things. So for example, cost of cash is 9%, while maybe cost of credit might be much less, is something that I haven't heard a lot of SMEs actually talk about. And so therefore maybe there is room for an organization like CPA to conduct training programs or talk about some of these issues to the SMEs, because they're really the backbone of a country. So can we have education, short-term, long-term programs for these people? And the next thing, I think, in today's day and age, if we're going to prepare for the next 5 years, I think that data and facts are friends has to be accepted, and not just something that we have to keep away from.
Fantastic, fantastic. Winston, a quick 30-second answer to sum up the strategic part of it.
Yeah, okay. So the strategy, what I see is actual collaborations. So collaboration with foreign markets, collaboration with local producers, and collaboration with research and technology. So with those collaborations, the industry can bring in the required knowledge to give the market the desired product and exceed the customer's satisfaction.
Wonderful.
So,
Okay,
so
fine.
it is collaboration.
Fine. Maesha?
So the quick answer for SME strategy would be adaptability and agility. That sums up everything, I think.
Wonderful. Actually, now before we come into the second phase, I want to mention this. Actually, we Miss Shiranti Tevarapperuma, Managing Director of Ceylon Oxygen, she had a personal emergency crisis, so therefore she is unable to come. But in that light, our technical chair, Dr. Ratnayak, requested the Professor Vohara for take part of in place of her. Actually, she gracefully accepted, and she's here today. I think we need to thank her for that. I would appreciate if we can give a good applause to her in that light. Because that's the generosity of a good teacher. because wherever the opportunity comes, you need to impart your knowledge. I think she is more than enough to do that. I think that's fantastic. So then coming on to the second round, as we say, that is about redesign. Redesign is about something incremental and improvements. And then do you think you are in a position to leave?
I have to leave.
Yeah, I understand.
In 5-7 minutes. So.
Then shall we get her to talk quickly about 5 minutes? That would be better. So I'm thankful to you doing that, Professor. So now this is coming into redesign, and that is a more tactical part. We like to have your precious understanding in that area, Madam.
So I'm really sorry that I do have to leave before the panel ends because I have another commitment. So I think what I want to say in terms of tactical is some of the work that we have been doing at a center that I'm involved in, which is Center for Innovation, Incubation and Entrepreneurship at IIM Ahmedabad. And in all the work that we have done with them, with the small and the startup business community, is the fact that there are very few toolbooks that are available in management which really help them, because a lot of what is thought about in management is for large organizations, and therefore it's too daunting, and sometimes even it seems like, you know, it doesn't apply to me. And therefore, one of the things is to possibly, you know, of course, take what you have with a pinch of salt, and then to say, okay, what really works for me? So, for example, you know, maybe I cannot send my people for training to Harvard or to IIM Ahmedabad, but can I still find training opportunities that would work for my team? Are there ways in which we can document and structure some of these things? So my sense is that we really need to look at, so what we've been trying to do at CIIE is to create playbooks for startups. So what do I do if I have a team? What do? I have some of these. And my suggestion is that that maybe the SME owners can sometimes shed their shyness of coming to large institutions to learn from. My experience is that a lot of SME owners don't want to come to large institutions. They feel shy to come into it. And so one of the things we have done is we do clinics. So maybe on a Saturday we say, we're going to talk about best practices in hiring. Anyone can sign up and anyone can ask questions, and we will look at what is happening. And I think if we can, some of these give you ideas, because again, I think SMEs can sometimes get very much like a frog in the well. You know, I think this is my world. So can I step out? Can I look at what is happening? Can I learn from others? Can I learn from all quarters? And that might help for them to grow. The other thing is exploring markets. Again, exploring markets can be very expensive if I try to do it on by myself, but maybe associations, maybe groups of SME owners can work together to explore markets. And once the value gets unlocked in exploring markets, it can be available to all, not just to one or two people. So again, that I think is important, because in almost everything, if you can't sell your product at the best value, no matter how well you produce it, it has no, you know, it's going to have its own limitations. And I think the third, which is again something, you know, was mentioned by our friend in Australia, is collaboration. How do we create platforms for collaboration, especially for supply chain? Because that's another one which, if I try to do it at sub-scale, the costs go up. But if we collaborate and we do supply chain, then our scale goes up and our costs come down. So I think technically, I think these would be the three things that I would say. So how do I work? How do I learn? How do I address my own learning needs and my team's learning needs? How do I learn from all angles, and how do I also explore markets at a larger scale, so step out in the big bad world, and the fourth would be to also collaborate to bring down costs.
Thank you, Professor. We have a lot of questions, but we respect your urgency. And thank you very much, Professor. And very nice to have you on board. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Right. Before I may pose any questions to the others, I like to mention about Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel, who wrote a fascinating book, 0 to 1, who talks about very interesting comment. Now, Peter Thiel is a founder PayPal and also investor SpaceX, right? So what he said was companies need to think about 0 to 1 rather than 1 to N. 1 to N means very incremental improvements rather than innovative improvements. I think current point, I think in this discussion what we saw was we need to see as both of you said, and so is Winston, that we need to have very innovative thinking, innovative mindset in our businesses to tackle this kind of situations. International economic situation, local economic situation, in that light. So what I want to know is, if you think about 0 to 1 approach, more innovative thinking, in that light, I would like to come to Mithila on a tactical sense. What are the kind of things that you would be able to impart to us, to our audience, for them to take back? Again, I'm telling you how to do rather than what to do.
Sure. So thank you, Doctor. In terms of areas where we can touch, so there's so many areas, but which I spoke of earlier. So for now, if I'm being very specific, let's skip finance, because Sri Lanka, in comparison, when you look at the finance domain, we have a very thoroughbred group of professionals in all of the organizations who manage the financial teams, financial domains in a very professional and a very efficient and effective manner in comparison to other countries. But I'd like to touch on some other areas, specifically IT and technology, and how organizations should reimagine how to really reorganize themselves in the next 5 years. Now, if you take into account areas of technology such as automation, it's extremely important. Now, I see those of you specifically in the banking and financial services industry, there's many of you there. Ask yourself still how many, from a percentage, how much of work is mundane and repetitive versus automated, right? Simple things like your bank recs, your end-of-day operations, your crib process, right? Your user management. Still, majority of the banks are still trying to look at ways on how they can automate. So these are part and partial, they must be automated. If you really look at how regional and global banks run, automation is the key. Specifically, if you take an example such as governance monitoring, there's so much of capability that you can gain by simple automation of a few processes. So that's something you need to look at. And also bringing a data-driven culture. Data is a culture. You still have organizations run where the very senior level of management is like, oh, you know what, I ran my organization for 20 years using my gut. Next 5 years also I'm going to run it using my gut. No, we need to look at how we are going to use the information, that the rich amount of data that you sit on to create valuable business insights, and how you're going to act upon that. And IT should really be business driven. It's not your IT department saying, you know what, we need X investment, Y investment. Businesses should understand the business capabilities that you require, and you should demand that from your IT team, saying, you know what, I require ABC capability. Then your IT team should be like, okay, here is the functionality that will sort out ABC. So that's something very important. We really need to rethink at how we look at IT. Specifically from a board point of view also, I think board IT governance is something very important. Someone who understands IT, at least one member should be present in all of your boards. I think that should be a mandatory KPI that all of you all should follow. Moving into HR, I think it's something that we talk about a lot, and it's purely about culture, right? how fun is your workplace? Is your workplace fun? Do you wake up on a Monday morning to go to work, or do you just want to get back in bed and sleep for another hour? I think that shows how great your organization culture is. Specifically today, like Mahesha mentioned, in every, whether it's corporate, SME, startup, we are very hungry for talent. Talent is absolutely non-existent in a certain context. So how do we protect the little talent we have? It's by making sure you have a great culture. And also, we need to increase employee stickiness, right? A lot of these conglomerates have a lot of synergy. Are we using these synergies to the best advantage? I don't think so. In terms of making their lives better. And also freedom, like I said, working from home, working from anywhere you want, and measuring based on deliverables. And also in terms of policies and procedures, I think we really need to look at how we can change, because some organizations still have policies and procedures that have been written 20 years ago. We need to change it. We need to make it much more flexible and concise. Moving into a few more areas, Doctor, if I may say, in terms of something that Professor also mentioned and Vincent also mentioned, in terms of collaboration, supply chain collaboration is very important in terms of especially private organizations versus government organizations. I think that's where collaboration is the least present. I think that's something we need to focus on. We need to get our people to take more risk. You know, risk is frowned upon in specifically our country and our culture. So how do we let them take risk, make mistakes, and say, you know what, it's okay to make a mistake as long as you learn from it and you inculcate innovation into your process. So those are some of the things that I want to touch on.
Yeah, before I go to Winston, just a quick one. Now, we Sri Lankans are relatively reluctant to get into collaborations, partnerships. Quick answer, how to do that? You have already had that experience?
So it's all about win-win-win.
Win-win?
Right?
Yeah.
Win-win-win.
Win-win-win.
Win-win-win. In most parties, now for example, when we started my startup, Potenza, we used to compete with a lot of local players, right? Specifically, if you take the giants, specifically in the region and in Sri Lanka. Now what we are doing is we are heavily collaborating. For example, they have projects which they do not have capacity, we have resources. We partner with them. We have projects where we require certain types of resourcing where they have. So again, we win, they win, and the end customer wins. That's what I meant by win-win-win.
I like your comment, win-win-win. I think that's a good learning back home for all of us. Right. Now are you coming on to Winston? What can you say about, from your side, Australia, on tactical measures? And a quick one, because we have a time pressure also, so quick one would be better, Winston.
Yeah. Okay. So the main thing I would like to mention here is actually we can, the SME can proceed basically on 3 areas that are in addition to what Mithila has mentioned. One thing is defining your scope in the sense of market as well as your product. Then the second one is actually technology. So working with the technology, again it comes to collaboration where you can use the new technology to improve your product or service up to the standard and keeping up with the pace. You see that there is much research going on even in Sri Lanka and other countries about renewable energy. In the same way in food sector, so we used to say that apple a day will keep the doctor away. So in the same sense, if you give them the proper nutritional or healthy foods, you hardly have to visit the doctor. So in that way, in every sector, the technology is very important. So to keep up your product with the pace. And the third one, of course, is getting into agreements, bilateral agreements. You can use the existing agreements between the countries in the zone in order to export your product. So everyone is worried that people are leaving the country, brain drain, but you can consider that actually expats or migrants as a potential customer. So there's a huge expat population in Australia as well as Europe, then Middle East. Those markets can be targeted by the small scale producer. No matter how small your company is, always target the export market. So use the existing agreements and also come into bilateral agreements, as well as in the long run it is more profitable or more sustainable if you go into multilateral agreements with several companies, so you can sustain your process and production in that sense. So agreements, technology, and collaborations on top of defining your scope. That is what the strategy that the small scale industry should adopt in order to get through this current situation and going into the next decade.
Thank you, Winston. It was wonderful. I think there's quite a learning there. I think we can take back home. Now I'm coming to Mahesha. What can you say about tactical point?
Thank you. So on the tactical side, while one part of it was touched as a question in terms of the accepting credit payments, I would like to touch on two things here, or rather three things here. One is on financial structuring. So while we do understand that the SMEs would understand about loans, overdrafts, and also maybe trade finance facilities, a slightly lesser known instrument I would like to mention is on the SME credit card. Because unlike the other facilities, a lot are not very familiar with the SME credit card. So it is still a credit card, but you use it for commercial purposes. So now with our personal credit card, we can go and buy one phone, but you can't actually buy 50 phones. But so if you are in the mobile, if you have a mobile shop or you are in electronic kind of field, SME entrepreneur, then you need to you buy that with a SME card. So the SME card also has the same benefits of a credit card where you have a limit and you use it only when you want to. So unlike a loan that gets credited to your account and then from the day it's credited, you are liable to pay back the installments, the credit card is only when used. And you also get an interest-free period like a personal credit card, whether it's like 40 days or 45 days or 50 days. So one side as a SME, I think it's important when discussing with a bank to ask for like this sort of a package of financial services or financial products so that you benefit from all angles. And secondly, from a banker or a finance company perspective, it is also important for the benefit of supporting SMEs across the country. Bankers also need to offer this as a package or a bundle of products and coupling it with even a POS terminal. So something I would like to actually recommend is in the SME package of products, financial products that are given, if a SME credit card and a POS terminal is also bundled, because then the banks also benefit of maintaining the collection account and getting the collections directly to the bank. So that is on one side. And the second one, again, I like to break some of the communication or like information gap. Going online, having an online presence, as much as it's considered to be important, there is a misinformation that it is very expensive to have an online presence, to have an internet payment gateway, there is a risk involved, etc. So firstly, as you start off, it's not really necessary to have a full integration and a payment gateway with a bank, because there are solutions offered by banks which are white labeled websites, and you can have a payment link facility which are given by quite a number of commercial banks presently. So that way you get into something which is scalable. When your business grows, then you can go into a fully fledged integration of a internet payment gateway. And secondly, about the risk factor, I mean, there's again a myth that online payments have risk. Online payments can lead to fraud. So these are, again, when you work with a reputed partner, reputed financial institution, a bank, these are all taken care of because the internet payment gateway providers do take care of it. Is part of their data security standards, that it is essential to ensure the security part of it. So it is far more safer than really carrying cash around. And the third one I want to say is about collecting information. I think it came up earlier, maybe in the past decisions were made on gut feelings, decisions were made on intuition. Yes, there is an element of intuition that comes into a decision, but today we have the capacity and the capability to collect a vast amount of information, so that collecting of those information and making right use of those information will help the company to make very customized solutions and to cater to customer segments in a better way, and that you identify better niche markets to serve. So those are the three things that I want to talk on the tactical side.
I think that comments are, it's fairly straightforward and we can easily understand, and thank you for that giving very simple explanation. Now we are coming into the last concluding comments. Mithila, I like you to put your comments into corporate perspective. So 30 seconds, corporate perspective, you are multifaceted, entrepreneurial and corporate, you are a part of a conglomerate and a director there. So why don't you sum up with a corporate perspective, please?
My intentions in the corporate perspective is to shatter the current structure. Right? I'm pretty much seen as a bit of a rebel, but that change needs to come. We really need to change the paradigm, right? Because if we do not do that, this is applicable to all corporates. The chances of us surviving the next 5 to 10 years, it's an extremely VUCA world, it's going to be tough, right? So this is applicable not only in Sri Lanka, in the region and globally. We need to really change the structure, the processes, the way we think, the way we enable people, the way we nurture talent. How do we look at succession? How do we retain the precious talent we have? So it's a complete, to answer your question, Doctor, complete upside down.
Fantastic.
To the current way we do things at corporates.
Actually, I like your comment, very spot on. Because you are telling that there's something going viral, kill the cow. So you have to kill the cow and restructure. That need to happen. Otherwise, we are complacent, and we are then continue to be complacent in that sense. Wonderful. Now coming to Winston.
Yeah.
30 seconds.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So actually, value addition is on the technological perspective. Value addition is the way forward. So we should actually, in the sense of food industry itself, we should build on what is existing. For instance, Sri Lanka itself has a reputation for food products like, let's say, tea, coffee, Ceylon tea, Ceylon coffee. And last year, Sri Lanka received this PGI, or Protected Geographical Identification for cinnamon. So these products can be targeted at niche markets in the world. Like the other one is that tapping into the markets in the neighboring countries such as India. If you take Australia, our main customer for our products, food products, dairy, meat and other products is China, which has 1.4 billion population. In the same way, Sri Lanka has a 1.4 billion population next door in India. So we have to tap into this market actually in the coming years. So in order to reach that, as I mentioned earlier, it's technology and collaborations that we should build.
Wonderful, Winston. Now I'm coming on to Mahesha. Mahesha, I need a very 30-second summing up comment, but you think about corporate perspective also a little bit would be nice. I think there are quite a bit corporate cross-section is there.
Okay, so I think my concluding comment would be to work on optimization. So optimization of business, optimization of processes, and optimization of costs. So this is not about, I think people confuse this with cost cutting. This is not cost cutting, this is cost optimization. So where you get the best value of all of your business and generate the better output. And I think it will go across corporates, it will go across SMEs or entrepreneurship, because you would look how you get the best value out of your entire business, of all your processes, of your human resources, as well as the every rupee that you put into your business. That will be my conclusion.
Wonderful. Actually, our technical chair is made a very firm request to me, finish by 3 o'clock. Give me about 2 minutes. There are one question I want to ask from. That's an audience question. Is that okay? Yeah, right. So, now the question is addressed to Mahesh Shah. What it's trying to say is, with reference to acceptance of card payments by SMEs or even corporates, they pass the cost back to customers. Is that the reason to pull is not there for card payments? What is the legal side? That's the second question. What is the legal side implication passing the cost back to customers?
Okay, so from a legal perspective, it is not allowed. However, now in Sri Lanka, it is not really practiced. As in, we do not have a proper mechanism. I think every one of us have maybe experience going into a shop or where they say if you pay with a credit card, you have to pay more, which is absolutely not legal. But we do not have a way of, okay, where do we complain or what do we do? But whereas in some of the other countries, there is a hotline where you immediately complain and that merchant gets blacklisted forever. So this cost factor is a reason why that's what I explained earlier. Some merchants do think that 2.5 or 3% is a cost and hence don't want to encourage credit cards, whereas not really understanding that cash has a higher invisible cost, because it doesn't, here it's very visible, you know, get 100,000 and you have to pay 3%, you see the cost of that. But whereas by collecting money, how much you need to spend on security, on insurance, on reconciliation, time spent on that, and that is one part of it, and how much a business opportunity cost you have by not accommodating credit cards, so the lesser business volumes that get is not captured into the equation. So that's really the answer to that.
Okay, wonderful. Coming to the end of this session, I just want to maybe, most of you all got quite a bit of things. If I put it into words, the words that took my attention here is collaboration, restructuring, resilience. So those are the kind of words that we learned. And also we learned how we can adopt psychological safety. I think that's going to be, I think the earlier three words can be possible if we can look at a way to implement psychological safety, because then people open up and people then feel free to add value to the processes and be bold enough to contribute to have a quality product or a service. So these are the kind of things I think we can take back to our companies or organizations. And then with regard to SMEs, I think what we can see is there is a serious management intervention is required at our level, and each person we need to look at how we can have a management intervention to entrepreneurs. Why so? Because they are very strong in entrepreneurship. They are strong-headed, but they are lacking certain areas, and especially on the human resource management. And therefore, we need to intervene and get them on board on more management thinking. If that is happening, I think we can make them better performing entrepreneurs. I think that's how it is. So in that point, I think we need to have certain digital platforms, digital adaptation, and also, of course, credit cards, and all kinds of things are required, and they need to be convinced. I think, therefore, we need to work hard to get them convinced on these certain things, and then only we can make it happen. Finally, I must thank Mithila for your valuable contribution to our audience here today. I think it was fantastic, and I like your bold thoughts, and I wish you all the best for that in that sense. And I'm very happy with the professor, because she went out of the way to make this event a graceful event, and we all should thank for her, and in that sense. And then Winston, and maybe, I don't know what time over there now, maybe late in the evening, isn't it? right? So still you are waiting here to add value to Sri Lankan. So that's the patriotism that you are talking about, and I'm very thankful, and your company, I wish you all the best. And finally, and Mahesha, I think you can add value to our organization, our countries much more better, and add value, and digitization is going to be order of the day in time to come, and with your credit card offerings. All the best to you. Thank you, and that's the finale of the session.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for our wonderful panel as well as our moderator. Yes, indeed, we'd like to say a big thank you to each of them. And to now do the honors of presenting tokens of appreciation, I'd like to invite on stage Professor Lakshman R. Vatavala, as well as Dr. Samantha Ratnayaka, who are both governing council members. We'd also like to invite Mr. Dilshan Arsukularatna, Director of CPM Sri Lanka, to please join us up on stage, as we now have tokens coming in the way of saying a big thank you to our moderator and panelists. Once again, our moderator for today in this session was Dr. Ravi Bamnusinghe. Let's put our hands together as we say thank you to you, sir. He's a founder of Sri Lanka SME. We'd like to say thank you to our panelists. We have one panelist who is abroad. Unfortunately, we're unable to give it to him in person, but we'd like to say thank you to Dr. Winston for joining us. We'd like to say thank you to Professor Nehara. She's not here, Neharika. And here we do, of course, have Mithila Vegapitia. Let's put our hands together as we say thank you to Mithila. He is Director Chief Marketing Officer at Potenza ANZ Australia, as well as Executive Director People and Brand at Laughs Holdings Private Limited. And then, of course, we have Mahesha Amarasuriya, who is Director at MasterCard Sri Lanka. Let's put our hands together as we say a big thank you to Mahesha Amarasuriya. And on that note, I'd like to invite our moderator as well as our panelists to please join in with our dignitaries on stage for a group photograph. This is our second panel discussion for the day, ladies and gentlemen, on the topic of reboot and redesigning the SMEs, entrepreneurship and corporate thinking. Here we have the resource people who have added value to our gathering. Can we please hear a huge round of applause one more time as we say a grateful thank you to each of them. Thank you very much to everybody on stage. All right, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we're now about to take a very quick break of 15